In this video, I show you how to make my deep dish apple pie as part of the Pies of March collaboration hosted by Tony of Kettle Kitchen and LeAnne at Mennonite Farmhouse. Okay, so this is a big recipe and it's a long video, so stick around. We're gonna get through it as fast as we can. So first off, we're going to be making the acidulated water to keep our apple slices fresh in. And as you can see, I'm getting through this as fast as I possibly can. Now, yes, I am using a knife to peel my apples with because I want to keep the pork cores and peels for again. But as soon as those apple slices are done, they're going into the lemon water so that they don't go brown, because I do have rather a lot to get through. My suggestion would be to find a movie or a TV show or an audiobook and just chill while doing this, because this honestly took me about 40 to 50 minutes to do all of the apples, because I'm not as fast as I used to be. And I just didn't want to rush it. Oh, and I ended up needing a much bigger tub as well. Okie dokie, so let's just take a moment to talk about the collaboration. This is part of Pies of March, which is being run by LeAnne over at Mennonite Farmhouse and Tony at Kettle Kitchen. There's going to be a giveaway on the 4th of April and on LeAnne's channel over at the Mennonite Farmhouse. All the information is down below in the link below. There are 31 channels in this collaboration, and I would suggest going and checking out the playlist, which is also in the description down below. Go and support them all, guys, and the giveaway includes a comment picker, so if you leave comments, you're going to be in to win. Alright, let's get back to the baking. Now, we're going to start off with the pastry next, which is my version of a pâté sucre. It's not a technically perfect pâté sucre. I don't use butter in mine, and I don't use unsalted butter and adding salt because I see that as pointless. I use margarine. I keep it easy. You don't tend to need to have the water if you use margarine, and you don't, it does end up, because we need a thicker pastry, we don't want to be rolling out really thin, because otherwise the pie won't hold. You need to have some structure to your pastry with this. And I find the way that I make it here has worked for me for many years when I was making these for people in my restaurant. So we've started off with our flour and our icing sugar, and now we're going to measure in our margarine. You can use softened butter for this if you want. It's pretty much all made all together. There's no resting time or anything like that, which is why I didn't start with this to start with, because it's not the longest thing. The chopping of the apples is the longest thing, and the cooking time, but you know. So we've started off with our flour, our icing sugar and our butter / margarine, and we're going to rub the butter through our dry ingredients as you would for a normal sweet short crust pastry to get it into as close to breadcrumbs as possible. You want to use as little of your hands for this as possible. I mean, it doesn't really matter. It's just it does if you're using butter and you're doing this as technically correct. We're not doing it technically correct. We're doing it this way, which works really well for this pie. So, but for me, it's just about getting messy at this point. I don't really want to get 100% messy. Otherwise, what happens is that it'll just, the heat in your hands melts the butter, which is why you don't want to use your whole hand for the most part. But on this day, I was struggling with having sticky things on my hands, so I was only using one hand to start off with to try and keep that down to a minimum, because you know, sometimes sticky things just aren't what you want in a day. Now you can do this in a food processor if you want to and blitz it through. I don't want to. I wanted to show you guys that it is possible to do by hand. Yes, it takes a little while, but you know what? all the best things to do. And this particular pie, you need to set aside a good afternoon for, or a good morning for. I left this far too late in the day to start, and by the time we finished it, it had to be left overnight to cool so that it was safe to come out the tin. So we didn't even get to taste it on the day, which, you know, it is what it is. But normally I would make a pie like this in the morning rather than the afternoon. So as you can see, we're getting down to that kind of breadcrumby consistency with a few little sort of hazelnut sized pieces. If you wanted to, in this recipe for this pastry, you could replace some of the flour for some ground walnuts or almonds. I've used hazelnuts in the past as well. And then you want to make yourself a well, because we're going to beat up our eggs. Now I have 4 large eggs here. They need to be beaten up before you put them in the thing. Baking's such a violent thing to do. You know, you're just constantly beating things up. And that's exactly what we're going to do to these eggs. We're going to beat these eggs up right now. Do you want to make sure that they are fully incorporated, the whites and the yellows, the yolks of the eggs, so that, you know, it's a consistent mix. You don't want to have too much difference. And then you want to pour that into the well of your dry ingredients that you made just before. Yeah. Hang on. Now, you can get your hands in there and start mixing it through. I prefer to use a knife because it means that I'm not putting my hands in that butter too often or that mix, and I'm not getting it all over the place. So I'm just mixing it with a knife. It just works better for me that way. But you want to make sure that all your dry ingredients get into your wet ingredients and what have you. Now, when you get to this point, you may want to add a little bit of the water. You may do. I did. I probably shouldn't have. I should have probably mixed it for a little bit longer, because this ended up being an incredibly wet mix that I wasn't quite ready for. So I've got to the point where I'm almost about to stick my hands in. Yes, my hands are very clean. On this day, I washed my hands more times than I can even tell you without sounding like I've completely lost the plot. But as you can see, this pastry is incredibly wet, incredibly sticky. So don't put your water in unless you've got to this stage where all of your ingredients are incorporated and you can move it around a little bit. And if you've got to this stage and it's all over your hands, you're going to have to add a little bit more flour. Not much, just a little bit, okay? And that's okay. And that's what I had to do, because mine was very sticky. So all you do then is you just incorporate that in. You don't want to mix it too much because this is a short pastry, but you don't want to make it so short that it's going to completely shrink. So you don't want to actually, you know, work the glutens like you would bread. And once it's done, you know, you'll know. As I said to you guys before, we don't want a really, really thin pastry. And in fact, what I do with this is probably going to shock a lot of people. Now, you want to have your cake tin. I have a 10-inch cake tin here, and I've lined the base with greaseproof parchment paper, or baking paper, whatever you want to call it. Now I've got a great big fistful of the pastry, and I'm going to work it over the base of my cake tin with my fist. This helps to get it out evenly, but it also means that I'm going to have a nice thicker pastry, because let's be honest, we've got a lot of apples there, and as much as we do what we do to them to prevent as much liquid loss as possible, we still get some. So you're going to want to have a lot of pastry at the bottom to make sure that that's going to take up any leftover liquid. Now this is really kind of fun, and it's a bit like playing with Play-Doh, only it's the pastry, and you can you know, as long as you fill up the base of the pan and have a little bit going up the sides ready for the sides, you're gravy. And just close off any of the seams that happen from any overlap. Yes, you can use a roller pin if you must, but I've actually found this method works better than if you try it with the rolling pin, because if you try it with the rolling pin you tend to end up with a few nicks, cuts and cracks that you weren't expecting, whereas this method, it's actually, for some reason, it just works better. I can't explain it. It's just one of those kitchen magic things. Now that we've got the base done, we're going to start work on our sides. So we're going to get a piece of the pastry and flatten it out in our hands, and then we're going to start working it around the edge of the cake tin. Now it's up to you at this point if you actually want to put some greaseproof or baking parchment around the outside of the tin. It's entirely up to you. I didn't on this day. I didn't really see the point. I also didn't grease it because this has a lot of butter in it, and if you grease it, you end up with a situation where it may actually slide down the sides of the cake tin. You don't want that. The other thing is that we can't put it over the top like we would a normal short crust pastry to make sure that it doesn't go down and slide down or shrink. We have to do it this way. So there are a couple of methods in what I'm doing where we don't want to, do what we would normally do. Now we've just slowly worked our way around and got each piece going in as we want. It's kind of like a patchwork if you want to look at it that way, and we're just getting the last piece in right now. Now this is actually a more traditional way of doing pastry. A lot of peasantry back in the day in medieval times, and not that long ago, even like 100 years ago and more, like 150 years ago, we're using this kind of method for these kinds of pies, whether they were sweet pies or meat pies. This is very similar to what you would do with a hot water pastry, is just pop it in, hand squished. I need to blind bake this pastry, and it's going to be for a bit longer than you would expect because obviously it's quite a large pastry case. Where you would probably blind bake it with the baking beans in for somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes, we actually did it for 20. And there is another reason why, and that is the amount of baking beans or baking rice or whatever you want to put in there. I have a really large tin of mixed rice, old beans, old chickpeas, bits of buckwheat, stuff that we haven't used, that I've just chucked in the baking beans box, because you want to get this as high as possible because of the shrinkage situation or the melting of the butter situation. This was actually help to hold the sides up. Now we're going to blind bake that in an oven for the next 20 minutes with the beans on the temperatures that are now coming up on your screen. Now the second part of this blind bake is we're taking the beans out, and it's going to be cooked back in the oven again for another 10 to 15 minutes as it is, same temperature. Cool off. Now while that is baking, we're going to be draining our apples and getting them organized. Now on this day I probably should have had another one of those white tubs because it would have saved up a little bit of washing up, but I didn't, so I did it this way. Now I'm taking these lemon slices out. You could actually leave these in if you wanted to. There's nothing wrong with that. I've done it before and it's just been just as good, if not better, because you've got the extra lemony flavour to the apples, which is fantastic. Can I just say, completely different to the old earthy flavours that you normally use when it comes to apples. Having some citrus in there to enliven it is actually, I prefer it personally. That's my preference. We are, however, going to just drain these apples off first because we don't want all that water in there. What are you doing with the water afterwards, Blue? Well, that's going to go and feed my peach tree. which is in the greenhouse, and it needs watering because it now has a roof over it, which it didn't have before. But what I am going to do is I'm going to leave it to ferment for a couple of days first, so then you've got the extra really nice feedy stuff in it to feed my peach tree. Now I am splitting these apples in half in one bowl, half in the other. Like I said, I should have had another white tub, but I didn't pull it out in time, but that's okay. If you are going to do it this way, whatever your flavors are, you need to split them in half between the bowls, because that's what you're going to be doing. Okay, you're going to be putting in your seasonings at this point. Now I'm starting off with my demerara sugar, which is a dark version of raw sugar, and we're going to put a good half cup in each, or quarter cup, half cup, whatever floats your boat, in each bowl with the apples, because the apples themselves have enough sugar. You don't need loads and loads of sugar. We want to be able to taste the apples. We're not trying to hide the apples. Now at this point I had run out of flour in this particular bag. I did actually get some more. I don't think I'm showing you that. I don't think I recorded it, but I actually think I needed to have a little bit extra flour, which is why I've put it in the ingredients that there is extra flour. So the flour, and I also added a tiny bit of cinnamon, not a lot, just enough, just a tiny bit. Now the reason you want the flour is because as the apples cook, they're going to release their juices. You want that to pick up, and what happens is that the flour actually turns all that melted sugar and beautiful apple juice into a sauce, a rather thick sauce, rather than a wet, soggy, juicy mess at the bottom of your cake tin, which you don't want. No, you really don't. Trust me. So next we're going to pour our apples into our pastry case that has been blind baked and has cooled a little bit. And we're going to fill it up, probably, we're just putting them all on, just piling them on as high as we can possibly get them, because we're going to use every single one of those apples in this. Because, you know, go big or go home, you know. Let's be fair. If you're going to make a pie, make a pie. Now for the top, I actually did get the rolling pin out for this because I wanted this last piece of pastry to stretch as far as possible. The top of the pie isn't as much of a concern as far as structural integrity is concerned, so it's okay to have it a little bit thinner than the walls and the base, but you don't want it to have it too thick. But I did want it to be fairly even over the top, and this was just a little bit easier. It's not hugely thin, it really isn't, and it is quite a thick, biscuity, sort of almost cookie dough pastry, so don't expect it to go really thin, because it just won't, and that's okay. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Now that we've rolled it out, we're going to place it over our cake tin and pie. We have quite a lot there, which is really good, because we're going to need that. Now our first job that we're going to be doing is we're going to be making sure that that is tucked into the sides, because the top and the sides have to attach. Otherwise it's just going to be not fun to try and cut. Okay, so you want to then, what you're going to do is you're going to tuck your pastry into the collar. Now that you've tucked it all up, what you're going to do is you're going to cut off your excess. You want to leave yourself about half an inch to centimetre of pastry on the overlap, because we're going to curl it up so that it's properly on the top, okay? But yeah, first you need to cut off all your excess bits. Okay, anyone who knows me or has known me for any kind of length of time knows that I'm not very good at doing fancy schmancy fiddly things, so please excuse the fact that I am like a bull in a china shop when it comes to trying to roll the top of the pastry to look like anything fancy, because it just will not work. I try. It's let's just call it rustic, homemade rustic cottage looking pie, which frankly I really don't care that it doesn't look fancy. We don't care that it doesn't look fancy. When I was working, it didn't matter, it didn't look fancy. People just looked at it and went, oh, we want some of that. And that was all you had to do. So it never had to be really, really fancy. I'm kind of trying to do the little twisty thing. I'm doing my best, kids. I am. Just, some of us aren't as clever as others. Now once that's done, you need to make yourself some steam vents. This is about as fancy as I get with the steam vents. I usually put 9. I put 2 on either side, so it kind of looks a little bit like a cross. And then I do a couple in the corners a little bit further down, but then I always put one right in the middle as well, because right at the pinnacle top of your pastry, because that's where the steam can accumulate up the top there and you can end up with a soggy peak, and you don't want that. So next we're going to do a wash. I did a milk wash this day. You can do an egg wash if you want to. Just make sure to cover absolutely everything, because this is not the end of what we're doing. Okay? You want to get your egg wash on, you want to get your milk wash on, you want to make sure there's a little bit of liquid all over that pastry, okay? If you are vegan and you want to do this, I would suggest using something like an almond milk or a coconut milk or something like that. Something that's got a little excess fat in it, which will help with the browning process of the pastry. Now we come to the reason why you want to make sure that you've got enough liquid on there, because we are going to sprinkle on some demerara sugar, which, as I explained before, is a darker version of raw sugar. It's a more raw version of raw sugar, if that makes sense, because it's been processed one less time again. So as you can see, I kind of missed a bit apparently over there, so I just sort of like added a little bit more milk to it. Just be generous at this point, because that's going to add some really nice sort of sugary crunch to the top of your pies, just like Grandma made. This pie took 50 minutes to cook on the temperatures I gave you. It was 8 o'clock at night when it finally finished cooking, and I had to wait until 6 o'clock in the morning to actually pull it out the cake ring. That's okay, and I was really, really proud of this. It is stunningly beautiful. It's come out amazingly well. As you can see, there's a couple of knife marks on the sides there. I just put like a little butter knife down the side to loosen off the sides. It's huge, it's wonderful. Yes, it missed a little bit of pastry, got left on the tin side, but I'm not that worried about that. But it is quite amazing. You know, and we had the opportunity to have pie for breakfast. I mean, how often do you get that? And look at that. So like I said, I would have added a little bit more flour into my mix, which is what I've added into the ingredients. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, please do give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more videos like this. And don't forget to leave a comment, because you might be in to win. And let me know if you try it, because if you try it and you like it, let me know. I like to hear these things. It's great. And I will see you again next one. Bye.